Hey Valley Mills students, I'm so excited to join with you today for our online student ministry as we continue our series, God's Not Done With You. If you're watching this, I want you to share this, comment on it, or like it because we want to know who's watching, we want to connect with you, and we want to see you. So please comment, please share, please like. Today we're going to look into one of my favorite Bible stories, and it's about Joseph, the life of Joseph. I loved listening to this story and reading this story and learning about this story of Joseph and his life. Now, Joseph was in the line of Abraham, and we all know the song, Abraham had many sons. Well, Abraham didn't really have that many sons, but he was promised descendants, and with this, he had sons, and he had a son named Isaac, and Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau, and Jacob became Israel. Jacob was renamed by God to be Israel, and Israel had 12 sons, and the 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel. And in these 12 sons, there was a guy named Joseph, and Joseph, he really pushed on the line of Abraham, and we're going to see that today, and we're going to see how in this, he had disagreements with his 12 brothers. And like any big family, he had a bunch of problems with these 12 brothers. And the 12 brothers actually ended up hating him. So let's start in Genesis 37, 3-4. It says, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that his father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word about him." Joseph was a favorite of his father's. You see, his father Israel had married Leah and Rachel was the wife that he really loved, and Leah was just kind of there, and Rachel didn't have kids for a long time. You know, Leah had a lot of kids, their servants had a lot of kids, but Rachel herself did not have any kids for a really long time. And then she finally became pregnant and had Joseph. And Joseph was just his father's favorite. He was born in his old age, and he just loved him. And not only that, but he showed that he loved him by giving him this coat, this ornate robe, this coat of many colors that it's been called. It's just like something that really set him apart, and people knew that he was the favorite. And no one likes being labeled that their brother's the favorite. No one wants to see that their father loves someone more than them. And his brothers were no different. They hated him. They couldn't speak a kind word about him. No one liked him. Joseph didn't do himself any favors by bragging about the dreams that he then had. He set himself apart by starting to brag about these dreams where his brothers would bow down to him. And not only his brothers would bow down to him, but his mom and dad would also bow down. Now, Joseph is like the youngest brother, the second youngest brother. So the younger brother ruling over the older brothers is unheard of. But he says that they're going to bow down to him, and he's going to rule over them. Not only that, but his parents are going to bow down to him, showing that he's going to rule over them. This did not get him anywhere with his brothers, but hatred and hatred that turned into murderous thoughts. Look at Genesis 37. It says, "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let us kill him, throw him into one of the cisterns, and say that the ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. They hated Joseph so much that they were willing to shed his blood to kill him. But thankfully, Joseph had a brother to fight for him. He had Reuben. Reuben didn't want him to die. He was actually going to try to rescue him. So they convinces him to throw him into a cistern. And they don't shed his blood at that point. But they strip him of the robe. They act like a ferocious animal came and killed him because they were so jealous of this favoritism so much that they even took the robe. Joseph was left in the cistern, left to starve, but the brothers had a change of heart. Why not profit off our brother? Like, they saw some traders coming by. Why not sell him? Like, why have blood on our hands? Why not just sell him? Why not cash out on this guy? So Genesis 37:28 says, so when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. Joseph was sold to traders that would take him to Egypt to sell him into slavery to Potiphar. Joseph is hundreds of miles away from his family in a foreign country. They probably don't even speak the same language as him. He's alone, he's scared, and without anyone to save him. But we see how God is going to help him through it all. Genesis 39, if you turn over there, Genesis 39, 2-4 says, the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of the Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. Joseph is a slave, yet God was with him. Joseph thought he had nobody in his corner, but God was with him. God caused him to prosper, to become a leader in the household, to bring wealth to Potiphar and to himself as well, and to have success. Things are looking up for Joseph, right? Slavery isn't half bad for Joseph, actually, but Joseph still has a few more obstacles to get through. Look at Genesis 39, 6-20. Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me. But he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in the house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, come to bed with me. But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her husband's servants. Look, see, she said to them, this Hebrew has brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard the scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. She kept his cloak beside her until her master came home. Then she told him the story. That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. When his master heard the story, his wife told them, saying, this is how your slave treated me. He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. So Joseph, he's a good-looking dude, but that ends up hurting him, actually. The ladies are quick, literally, to jump on top of him. He has the chance to be with this master's wife, but he says no. You see, the problem is, it's his boss's wife. Mrs. Potiphar wants Joseph, and she won't take no for an answer. Joseph is trying to be righteous, trying to follow God, trying to be respectful of his master, and he knows full well that Potiphar gave him control over everything in his household but her. Joseph wasn't going to mess that up, and Joseph wasn't trying to be a bad dude, but a good man, but that didn't matter to Mrs. Potiphar. Whether because she was embarrassed or angry with Joseph, she decided that if she can't have him, then no one can. So she brought up this lie that he made sport of her, that he came to her and wanted her, and all this stuff. And Potiphar's angry with his servant Joseph. Angry, and it burns so much that he puts him in prison. But he's put in prison with where Pharaoh puts his prisoners. So while in prison, he gets to meet a few people that Joseph thinks might just help him out in this all. You see, Joseph was a dreamer, right? He could interpret dreams because God gives him interpretation. So Pharaoh gets mad with two of his workers, the cupbearer and the baker, and they come down to the prison, and they both have dreams. And Joseph, looking for an opportunity, he tells him the dream, tells him the interpretation, and he says, "But remember me when you go back to Pharaoh's house." You see, the cupbearer was going to be back and working for Pharaoh, but the baker was going to die. And so Joseph says, "Remember me. Remember me. Tell Pharaoh about me. I'm innocent. I didn't do any of this." But the cupbearer forgets about him. Days go by. Weeks go by. Months go by. Years go by. The cupbearer didn't remember him. Until one day, Pharaoh had a dream. And Pharaoh had this dream that no one could interpret. It was about 7 heads of grain and another 7 heads of grain that were ugly and were diseased and were not good for eating. And then you had 7 fat cows and you had 7 ugly, thin cows. And he couldn't get interpretation by his religious leaders. He couldn't get interpretation by his advisors. And he was distraught. He knew that this dream had some other meaning and he needed to know. But there's no one to respond to him. There's no one to interpret until the cupbearer goes, "Oh yeah, so funny story. One time you were angry with me, but you brought me back and you killed the baker and we both had dreams and, this guy interpreted dreams. He's probably still in prison. Hopefully he's not dead yet. He's probably there. Maybe go talk to him." So after years has gone by, they finally go to talk to Joseph. Joseph's brought to the Pharaoh, brought to the king of Egypt, and he's put before him and tells him exactly what's going to happen because of these dreams. He said, those 7 cows and those 7 heads of grain represent 7 years, and those 7 years are going to be of abundance. Egypt is just going to be booming with crops, booming with food, booming with everything. But then 7 years of famine are going to come. And if you don't know what a famine is when maybe a drought comes or whatever, but it cuts off all the food source and there's nothing growing, there's no food to be had, there's maybe no water to be had, and people begin to starve and they begin to die. And famines at that point were really bad. They didn't have a lot of the technology we had today. They didn't have the transportation they had today. So when one area had a famine, they were just out of luck. And not only that, but they were a very farmer-heavy culture. So if you didn't have food to put on the table, if you didn't have crops to sell, then you were just done. You didn't have any income and you were just done. So Joseph says, "Hey, you should put someone in charge of everything that comes in those 7 years of abundance. You put them in storehouses and then you sell them later, and then everybody has food, and not only that, but the Pharaoh gets rich." And Joseph begins to be that guy. He becomes second in the kingdom, and because of this interpretation of the dream and because God was with him, he is now at a high level in Egypt, and he's going to save people. He's going to save Egypt, and not only that, he's going to save his brothers. He's going to save the people of Israel, because one day the famine's hitting them, and they're starting to be hungry. Their tummies are starting to growl, and they're just hungry. So Israel sends his sons to Joseph. He doesn't know that it's Joseph, but he sends his sons to Joseph to ask for grain, to buy grain, and to try to make it through this famine. And you would think that Joseph is angry with his brother. He wants revenge. He was bitter. Maybe he's upset. But that's not the case. You see, even though Joseph was in prison for so many years and enslaved for so many years, and you would think he was so angry and he would keep a grudge, he's not. Look at Genesis 45, 4-7. It says, "Then Joseph said to his brothers, 'Come close to me.' When they had done so, he said, 'I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and no reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant of earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance.'" You see, Joseph's like, don't worry about it, don't be mad. It was God's plan. It was all in God's plan. And everything that you did to me was just God fulfilling what was his own plan. They were in a game of chess with God, and they were the pawns in his scheme, and he was just using them to sell Joseph into Egypt to save them, to save the line of Israel, to save his people. You see, God had a mission for Joseph. And if every little detail in Joseph's life did not pan out the way God wanted to and the way God envisioned them, Egypt would have starved, and so would have Israel. Leaving God's people without hope, Joseph had to be hated by his brothers. He had to be sold into slavery by the traders. He had to be brought to Egypt. He had to be a leader in Potiphar's house, be falsely accused by Mrs. Potiphar, to be in prison, to know exactly how to interpret the dreams of the baker and the cupbearer, that Pharaoh might meet him one day, that he may interpret their dreams, and that he may save them from the famine, to save them from starvation. Like, how incredible is that? How incredible is the life of Joseph, that every little thing had to happen so that Joseph was in the right place at the right time, that he could do something great for the kingdom of God. It's an incredible story, and it's incredible to see that all the pitfalls and all the highs and all the lows in Joseph's life all accumulate into this awesome story that works out for the goodness of God. Look at Genesis 50:20. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Sometimes it seems like God is just done with us. Times are tough. It seems like nothing's going right. People are accusing you of all these different things. People are gossiping about you. You find yourself in this dark and this lonely place. A prison, if you will, like Joseph. You find yourself in this pit, in this prison, and you feel like there's no hope. And sometimes this goes on for days, sometimes weeks, months, and even years. You don't know why it's happening. You feel like you have no hope. You feel alone. You feel like God has forgotten you. And sometimes this pushes us all the way to the edge of our faith, all the way out of faith of God. And we begin to question God. We begin to think that he isn't even there. And I'm almost 100% positive that Joseph had these feelings. You know, Joseph probably asked these questions. Why me, God? Why me? What did I do wrong? Where are you, God? I'm innocent. Why is this happening to me? What is going on? You see, the same questions that Joseph asked are the same questions you ask when you're in this metaphoric prison, when you're in this pit, when you're in this valley. You feel alone and helpless, and you feel like God has just left your side. And the thing is, if we take anything from the life of Joseph, I want you to take this, that in the midst of that prison, in the midst of those ups and downs, in the midst of all of it, God is working for his glory, that you may further his kingdom, that you may bring something to truth. And all this had to happen with Joseph, but the thing is, you need to take note of what Joseph did. Joseph trusted God. He trusted God. He continued to go on with his plan. He continued to look for ways out. He continued to look for ways to be firm in his faith, and he stood firm in his faith, and he continued on. He didn't waver. He was a good man. He was righteous. He did what God wanted him to do, and he looked for his opportunities, and he took them. And with that, it all worked out for the glory of God. The remnant survives. The people of Israel survived. Egypt survived. All because Joseph was faithful. We need to take notes of that. We need to live lives that are righteous even when things aren't so good. We need to live a good life even when times feel like we have no hope. We need to live and press on. We need to be patient and wait for what God has in store for us, because He has something great for you. He has something that is going to change your lives, change the lives of others. Maybe one day you'll save thousands of people. Maybe one day you'll save one person. But at the end of the day, we need to realize that God is there for us, that He is going to work things out, that He is going to do so many wonderful things to you if you are faithful to Him and you trust Him. So today, maybe you're in that pit, maybe you're in that prison, maybe you're struggling. I want you to know that God's not done with you. I want you to know that your life might be horrible right now. Maybe your life's good right now, but I want you to know every little thing that happens in your life is working to an ultimate purpose. But you have to be that purpose. You have to embrace that purpose, and you have to work for God. Because God's going to work for you if you love Him. God is going to work for you if you trust Him. And if you do what you're supposed to do, and you're supposed to put your faith in Him, God's never going to be done with you. God is going to work miracles through you. All you have to do is trust. God is not done with you, just like He wasn't done with Joseph. So continue on and say, I'm not going to be done with you, God, because you're never done with me. I hope you join us this week on Sunday at 6 p.m. for our Zoom small group. I'm going to text that out. If you do not get a text or an email from me, please text me or Facebook message me or Instagram message me. Please let me know. I hope you all can join us. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I hope you got something from it. I want you to look into the life of Joseph. I want you to continue to think about it and join us for that small group, because the life of Joseph is so impactful. It shows us everything that we struggle with. God can still work. God can still move, and God can still be there for you. So I hope you join us on Sunday. I'm so excited to see you all again, and I'll talk to you later.